Hi everyone! Today we are talking about ironing and pressing. And we're learning about this because this is going to help us have quality sewing projects. So the iron is a really important tool that we use in the sewing room. And when we have a sewing project that we have ironed during the assembly, it's going to look noticeably better than one that hasn't. But before we get started, let's have a recap of some ironing safety. So when we are bringing our gear out, when we're lifting the ironing board, it can be awkward, so we need two people to do that. And we're going to take it close to a power point. We need to make sure that the iron is turned on immediately before use and turned off as soon as you're finished. So we're not going to leave the iron plugged in and turned on so that it's hot. We're going to make sure that we turn it off as soon as we're done. And when you turn the iron off, it doesn't automatically get cold. It's still going to be hot for a really long time. So you don't want to be moving it straight away or packing it away straight away. You need to let it have some time to cool back down. The other thing is we only ever hold the iron from the handle. We never touch the ironing hot plate. If we want to make sure that the iron is cool before we put it away, we can actually take the iron, put it down onto the ironing board, and then just touch the ironing board afterwards. And if it's cool, then this will be cool. If it's still warm, this will feel a little bit warm to touch. Okay, so I'm ready to use my iron now. So I am going to take my power cord and I am going to plug it into the wall. Switch it on, and it's going to take just a few minutes for my iron to warm up. Okay, so our iron is warming up. We are going to check our settings on our iron. So here we go, we've got a dial on it on this iron. Some irons have buttons, but this one has a dial. And we're going to make sure that we have it set for cotton, because at school we are always sewing with cotton. So if you can see under here, there's a bit of a line that you can line up the dial to, and it's lined up with the word cotton, so that's perfect. That's what we need. So it's really important to make sure your iron is on the right setting, because if it's too hot, you could actually melt or burn a hole in your fabric and you can't repair that. And if it's not hot enough, if you've actually got it set, say over to a synthetic and you're using cotton, it can take a really long time to iron the wrinkles out of that piece of fabric, and you're just going to use a lot more energy to try to get that done. So let's set this back to cotton. Fantastic. And the other thing we're going to check just before we start is this little guide up here. This is our steam setting. We don't use steam at school. Steam is not really necessary when you're sewing because it can add moisture to the fabric, which can actually shrink your fabric and distort it. So we want to make sure we keep our iron on the dry setting. You only really ever need to use steam if you're ironing finished clothes and they're extra wrinkly. So I've checked my iron and yes, it's on the dry setting, no steam. Fantastic. So let's have a think about the reasons we need to use an iron in the sewing room. We've got our iron here, and I've got some fabric here. So to achieve a neat project, whether it's going to be a boomerang bag or a bowl cozy, we need to start with a flat piece of fabric. And if we have a look at these, they're not looking so flat. And it's a lot harder to cut out a pattern neatly if the fabric is all wrinkled. If your fabric is quite wrinkled, when you cut the pattern out, it might not actually be a very accurate cut. You might find that your straight lines don't end up quite so straight. So it's a good idea if you have quite a wrinkled piece of fabric to give it an iron before you cut out your pattern. So this brings me to my next point. Ironing versus pressing. So this is two different ways that we're going to be using our iron. So the first way to use our iron is exactly as we were just doing then, and that is to glide the iron across the fabric in a sliding motion. So we're going to go backwards and forwards, and this is great for removing wrinkles and creases in the fabric before you get started, or even during the process, just to make sure that everything is sitting nice and flat. So that's fantastic. That is nice and flat and looking really beautiful. So the other action we use when we're ironing is pressing. And pressing is when we're going to be firmly pressing the iron down on our fabric and lifting it up again rather than pushing it or sliding it. And this is perfect for making creases. For example, when we're doing our boomerang bag handles, we need to fold our fabric in half, and rather than gliding it, which can actually distort the fabric, we actually want to press, lift, press, lift, press, lift, press. And that is going to give us the perfect crease without making the fabric move underneath. So if we were to just move it around, see how it can kind of wrinkle the fabric as we go? But if we're pressing, press, lift, press, lift, press, lift, it's going to keep it all in the nice straight line that we need.